So what we first of all need is, what is a healthy diet? Is we need to set the international standards for what actually defines a healthy diet. Second thing, we've heard and we throw around what is a sustainable food and sustainable food this and this is going to solve the world. But what actually defines sustainable food? And these are two things that are actually missing right now from the food system. Is some sort of international agreement about what a healthy diet is and some sort of international agreement about what a sustainable food is. So what I'm working on with EAT is I'm working with a team of about 20 scientists, and we're defining the international standards for what actually sets healthy and sustainable foods. So it's like the IPCC for Paris, but we're doing that for the food system.
Okay, so what have you found so far? What is a healthy standardized diet?
We're launching a major report this fall, so we can't actually tell you exactly what's in it, but it's really plants. I mean, we have to have a radical shift away from meat. And really all forms of meat. Red meat particularly, but in terms of how much we should consume on a daily basis, that's something that we're going to be setting. So it's the types of food that we eat, how it's produced, and where it's produced. And what we're finding is it's not just the types of food, but it's also where we produce it. And one thing that we really need is we need to get away from this whole organic versus non-organic argument. Local versus non-local foods, because what we really need to be thinking more broadly in terms of healthy, sustainable. Because sometimes locally sourced food is not the best. And that avocado from Chile is actually more sustainable than the locally grown tomato. And we need a complete rethinking of how we want to do this. And
because we need to get into science, right? It cannot just be belief systems.
It has to be science and it has to be belief systems. And we have to move beyond the Nordic region and thinking about what is good for Sweden. I mean, this is really a question of how we're going to feed 10 billion people on this planet. And
that's only if the projections are in the mid, right? It could be worse.
It could be worse, but let's say we settle at about 10 billion. I think that might be a fairly safe estimate, although the UN keeps on pushing up the population. It's everybody on this planet has the right to a healthy, sustainable diet. Mm-hmm. And how do we do that? And that means that in some places we have to eat less. Some places have to eat more. And that's going to involve massive global coordination.
So we will have a food budget essentially per person on the planet?
A bit like the carbon budget.
Yeah, something like that.
Ideas are being thrown around like that in terms of what it actually looks like. And what does it mean to lift some countries out of poverty and out of extreme hunger? And what do other countries have to do to make sure that happens?
But one thing is sure, however, that meat is off the plate. Not totally off the plate, but
needs to be put to the side, and the plants need to come front and center. I think we really need to think our relationship with red meat especially. And not only from a health standpoint, but from an environmental standpoint. I mean, and if you don't think about the greenhouse gas emissions, then you just think about the health. I mean, red meat consumption, it's pretty clear that eating red meat is not very good for you. And it's a pretty linear relationship, and the less that you eat, the less risk that you have for developing certain types of cancers, cardiovascular disease, and others.
But is it mostly about meat then? Is that the one thing we should change and then we're good? Or are there other culprits as well?
Dairy, it's really animal source foods. Mm-hmm. And I think, we've probably heard this, or, heard this message quite a bit, but I think it's hard for us to comprehend what this actually means. And can we reduce our hamburger consumption down to 1 hamburger per month? As opposed to a daily meat. I think a lot of people still think about meat as being the front and center of what they eat, and they go in and they serve the meat dish, and then everything is kind of on the edges. We need to rethink that, put meat out to the edge, and put plants in the middle.
It's a really interesting question, however, when you talk about the system that is so distributed as food is, right? When you talk about energy consumption or energy emissions, we of course have the cars, but they are produced by a big factory somewhere, and you have the big energy companies and you have the big oil companies, and you can go after them. When it comes to the food sector, it's like a lot of small, tiny players.
Especially when you're talking about the producers, the small producers, and what that actually means. The millions of small shareholders who are producing the food, and then how do you impact them? But there are ways of doing it. But one of the first things that we need is we actually need targets. We actually need to know where we're going, and right now we don't know where we're going. If people are defining healthy food in a very different way, we don't know where to start. If people are defining sustainable food in very different ways, we don't know where to start. So we really need those two as at least a starting point to then from there build on and say, now we need these science-based targets that companies and others can actually jump on.
Okay, so once you have those targets set, like healthy food, for instance, I guess it's going to be tricky also with health because it's an individual thing, right? What's healthy for you, what's healthy for me?
It's not what the science is saying. It's pretty clear in terms of what is, within a range. But we need whole grains, we need proteins, we need fruits, we need vegetables. We need certain by broad categories, by food groups. We all need similar things. But whether it's 15 grams or 20 grams, the
fine-tuning part.
The fine-tuning is kind of that's not that really important. But the general idea in terms of moving away from animal source foods, it's pretty universal.
Okay. When it comes to the sustainability part, then. Don't we need a lot of data, an awful amount of data, in order to be able to see that? Or can we say things about in general terms, like do you eat avocados and not tomatoes? Or
yes, and it is like in terms of what foods are more sustainable and what foods aren't. You do need a lot of data, and it really depends on whether you're talking about methane and nitrous oxide emissions or you're talking about carbon dioxide emissions. If you're talking about methane and nitrous oxide, it's pretty simple because that comes from cows. It comes from ruminants, so it's easier to actually track those.
So you think in the future, not too distant future, we will actually track the food roaming around the planet. We will understand from where it's coming and what has gone into them and what's happening to our bodies when we eat them.
But let's say, for example, we achieve Paris, which is something we have to do. So let's say we completely decarbonize the food sector. Then it doesn't matter if you ship an avocado from Chile because it's going to be carbon neutral anyway. It's going to have a carbon impact of almost zero because everything will be. So what is going to end up happening if you're looking at climate emissions, it's just going to be methane and nitrous oxide. So that's where the ruminants and the cattle come into play. So we also have to achieve the Paris agreements. We have to completely decarbonize if we want to have any chance of achieving this globalized system. And the only way that we're going to be able to achieve this globalized system, we're going to have to optimize land in terms of where we actually produce it. So that means we're going to have to produce fruits and vegetables in some places and legumes in others, and we're going to have to really figure out. I heard one of the speakers talk about land that is dead. How do we actually revitalize that land and bring it back up, optimize the places, and then trade it.
So you see for yourself a gigantic international system of trading.
There's no other way of doing it.
No other way of doing it.
If we're not going to be able to locally grow ourselves out of this problem.
Okay, really interesting because take a look at the food system today. I think it's 80% is locally organized and produced these days. Whereas you're talking about perhaps turning this upside down and saying like 80% is going to be internationally grown. And
yeah, I think the number for trade is 15 to 20% is actually traded now, and that's going to have to be a lot.
A lot more. So a lot more international trade. So find yourselves your niche in the market for production, and then grow from there, essentially.
And that's tricky if you think about the way the world's going. We're growing towards more of an inward-focused world where we're not really actually promoting international collaboration. We're actually promoting the exact opposite. So what we need to solve these problems, whether it's Paris or the SDGs or whether it's fixing the food system, is really global cooperation on a scale like we've never seen before.
This is really interesting, and this will prove kind of a tricky question. And any entrepreneur who could solve that would be very welcome to the EAT family, right?
Yes, to all the families.
To all the families on the planet.
If we could figure out a way how to actually track it, how to monitor it, how to make sure it's healthy, sustainable, and then how to get politicians to start cooperating a bit better, that would be
that would be lovely. By the way, so at Smaka Stockholm, this big food festival we're running in Kungsträdgården, EAT is coming on Sunday to do a lot of cooking.
Yep.
And then talking about this. So you're most welcome to join the EAT people and us, and I think something like 70,000 other peoples there, in order to discuss more about the future and also taste a lot of the good stuff there. I think we challenged the chefs this year to come up with a future food that they would like to serve. And so I think we have 35 different burgers now at the festival, but 18 of them are actually vegan.
Yeah, wow.
So I think that's pretty fun. So thanks a lot, Brent, for coming here and sharing. Looking forward to hearing the report in the fall.
Yes, yeah, I look forward to coming back. Yep, thanks everybody.
Okay.